Well, a number of questions have been raised about how much cities across the country have coordinated their actions against Occupy Wall Street. Oakland Mayor Jean Quan recently admitted in an interview with the BBC that she and leaders participated in a conference call.
I was recently on a conference call of 18 cities across the country who had the same situation where what had started as a political movement and a political encampment ended up being an encampment that was no longer in control of the people who started them. And what I think you're starting to see is that the Occupy movement is looking for more stability. I spent a lot of last week talking to peaceful demonstrators, ones who wanted to separate themselves in my city away from the anarchist groups who have been looking for a confrontation with the police.
The conference calls were organized by the Police Executive Research Forum, a national police group. For a discussion on policing and the Occupy Wall Street movement around the country, we're joined by two people. Chuck Wexler is the director of the Police Executive Research Forum, and Norm Stamper is with us, the former police chief of Seattle, who recently wrote an article for The Nation magazine titled Paramilitary Policing from Seattle to Occupy Wall Street. I want to start with Norm Stamper because you just may have heard Dorley say thank you, Norm Stamper, as she got pepper sprayed today, remembering what it was like in 1999 as well at the Battle of Seattle, at the time when you were presiding over the police actions. Your thoughts today?
Well, we made huge mistakes back in 1999, and I'm afraid they're being repeated today across the country, in Seattle, in Oakland, and in all other cities where there have been confrontations between the police and members of the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Well, Norm Stamper, in your article, you mentioned that you think that there are institutional problems, structural problems in policing, that no matter who the political leaders are or what the top brass are, that these problems can continue to crop up and appear to be getting worse.
I certainly do believe that. I think the drug war, which has put police officers against young people and poor people and people of color, the war on terrorism, the domestic dimensions of that war, have all served to increase the militarization of America's police forces. And this is particularly tragic because prior to these developments, we were on a path to create what I would call authentic partnerships with the community. That means no more unilateral decision-making. It means, for example, today, police officers and Occupy movement leaders, understanding the diffusion of that leadership, getting together and carving out rules of engagement, if you will, that will help protect public safety, public health, and also assure civil liberties, human rights, and some degree of social justice.
As I said, we're also joined on the phone by Chuck Wexler, Executive Director of the Police Executive Research Forum that coordinated the conference call with mayors and police officials around the country. Can you talk about what's happening today? The Occupy Oakland, the massive police response, the kind of police response we saw in Seattle with the pepper spraying of not only Dorley Rainey, but many other people directly in the face. The conversation that took place and why you coordinated this call, Chuck.
Well, yeah, good morning. First of all, correction, we did not coordinate the call with the mayors. It was simply with police chiefs, and it originated from Boston and Portland. The police chiefs in those cities asked to just compare notes. You know, I think, you know, this movement has evolved since it started. It was very, you know, relatively peaceful, and quite frankly, I think a lot of the police officers had a lot in common with, you know, the demonstrators in terms of the concerns about the economy and working class people and so forth. But I think, you know, over time, in some cities, the nature of the demonstration has changed, but it's hard to talk about it, you know, all over the United States because I think you probably have, you know, it's very idiosyncratic depending upon the city, depending upon the nature of who's involved. But in some cities, it has that the hand of the police has been forced by, either violence or the changing nature of what's been happening on the ground. And I don't have the details about Oakland and Seattle and so forth. I can just tell you, and I know Norm Stamper would agree, at least insofar as we learned a lot from what happened in Seattle when he was chief up there about handling demonstrators. And I think the police are far more careful about not wanting to be drawn into something that it really has nothing to do with them, and really trying as much as they can to exercise restraint, to use intermediaries to reach out to the leaders of these occupied movements. The challenge is there aren't really any leaders, or if there are leaders, they don't want to be leaders. So it's difficult to know who's responsible, who's in charge. But I think, the police today are far more careful about exercising restraint. I mean, by and large, you have 17,000 police agencies in the country. So, it's hard to make generalizations. But I do think that, when the first Occupy Wall Street movement started and police saw what happened on the bridge and so forth, and the police sort of getting drawn into that, there's been really a reluctance on the part of the police, to want to move unless absolutely necessary. And so I think the political structure within these cities has played a big role in determining what kind of action the police are going to take.
Norm Stamper, your response.
Well, I have great respect for Chuck, and I do believe that since 1999 and the battle in Seattle, there have been many changes. My concern is many of those changes have been for the worse. The officers, for example, in Oakland were dressed as my police officers were in Seattle, which is in effect in full battle gear. We were using military tactics. I authorized the use of chemical agents on nonviolent offenders. I thought I had good justification at that time. I did not. The police officer in me was thinking about emergency vehicles, fire trucks, aid cars being able to get through a key intersection. The police chief in me should have said, this is wrong, and vetoed that decision. I will regret that decision for the rest of my life. We took a military response to a situation that was fundamentally nonviolent, in which Americans were expressing their views and their values, and used tear gas on them, and that was just plain wrong.
Chuck Wexler, I'd like to ask you about that, not only about this issue of the increased militarization, also that there have been other cities where law enforcement has taken a very different approach. In Philadelphia, in Albany, the district attorney is refusing to, declining to prosecute cases of arrests of people who are being arrested for being in a park, but also the way that some of the police forces are dealing with the press, and because the press are supposed to be there to be able to be the eyes and ears of the public in these events, but increasingly you're getting reporters arrested, removed, not allowed to be at the biggest flashpoints, or to be able to take photos or to take camera shots of them.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it's the police response is going to vary from city to city, but let me just kind of back up a little bit and respond to what Norm said. And I have a lot of respect for Norm Stamper too. We learned a lot. He's very forthcoming with what went right and what went wrong with the battle for Seattle, if you will. But in fairness, you were faced, Norm, in a very difficult situation, and in fact, there really hadn't been many demonstrations up till Seattle. I mean, prior to the Vietnam era, there was a big lag time, but what does happen in some of these events is you can have 90% of the people are there peacefully, and you have this small contingent. And I think, Norm, what you had in Seattle is you had this group of anarchists that somehow was able to cause such disturbances that it forced a reaction that perhaps was an overreaction, but I don't think the police were prepared for it. And today, the police struggle between these two extremes, between people who go to exercise the First Amendment rights and then people who are there to cause, damage and destruction.
So, Norm Sanford, respond to that issue. Why you still think you were wrong, that you're taking issue with Chuck Wexler here, that given the situation in 1999, you now say you did the absolutely wrong thing?
Well, for 5 years after I retired, I remember being on book tour and having people come up to me and say, I was on the streets and I got to tell you, I was shocked at the behavior of the police. And I asked them about what was particularly shocking about the behavior, and it all came back to me. It came back to my authorization of the use of chemical agents, a euphemism for tear gas or pepper spray, and the effect that had from that moment on and throughout the week. There's no question but what anarchists, by definition, or for that matter, even recreational rioters who are simply sitting in a bar and see the action and get attracted to the downtown area, we had some of that, can help distract attention away from the cause itself and create major public safety issues for the police. Here's my point. If the police and the community in a democratic society are really working hard, and it is hard work, to forge authentic partnerships rather than this unilateral paramilitary response to these demonstrations, that the relationship itself serves as a shock absorber. Picture police officers helping to protect the demonstrators. Picture demonstrators saying, we see people on the fringes, for example, who are essentially undemocratic in their tactics. And so we need to work together to resolve that issue. These resolutions are clearly not easy. One of the things that complicates the picture enormously is when a woman like Ms. Rainey is pepper sprayed. When innocent people who are there to protest what I consider to be very legitimate grievances against corporate America, against a government that has, in many respects, been bought off by corporations, the police have a responsibility to be neutral. It should be apparent that I'm not neutral, but I'm no longer a cop. And police officers on the streets really do need to be neutral referees, and they need the help of their civilian, if I may use that term, partners.
Speaking of neutral referees, I wanted to bring a judge into this discussion. Retired New York Supreme Court Judge Karen Smith, who worked as a legal observer early Tuesday morning here in New York. I saw her right on the corner of Wall Street shortly after police raided the Occupy Wall Street encampment. Judge Smith, what did you see?
Well, I arrived about 1:30, 1:40 in the morning, got out and walked to Day and Broadway, and the police were in full riot gear. I mean, it was a paramilitary operation, if there ever was one. I mean, which that's here it is, 1:30 in the morning, what we call a stealth eviction, 1:30 in the morning, and they were just lined up 2 blocks from on either side from the park so that nobody could get near. With this solid wall of police, I was wearing, and I brought this, a hat which says the National Lawyers Guild Legal Observer, and as you can see in color, it's quite bright, and
it's
at night
fluorescent green.
It's fluorescent green, and then I was wearing it, and I had a pad and a pen, and I was there to take down the names of people who were arrested so we could follow them through the system and just observe what was going on. And as I'm standing there, some African-American woman goes up to a police officer and says, I need to get in, my daughter's there, I want to know if she's okay. And he said, move on, lady. And he kept pushing, they kept pushing with their sticks, pushing back, and she said, and she was crying. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he throws her to the ground and starts hitting her in the head. And I walk over and I say, look, cuff her if she's done something, but you don't need to do that. And he said, lady, do you want to get arrested? And I said, do you see my hat? I'm here as a legal observer. He said, you want to get arrested? And he pushed me up against the wall. And you know, it was late at night. There was a lot going on. People were, all of a sudden, there was like a cordon of police pushing everybody into Day Street between Broadway and Church. And it seemed like they were setting everybody up to get arrested. And then they started, some people broke away, some of the police, and started running after people. I moved away and then decided that I needed to get on the other side. I received a call that there was things that were developing on Pine and Broadway. And so I moved all the way east to go around the police and then ended up on Pine and Broadway, which is really where I ran into you.
And of course, you had a personal interest as well. Your son was also one of the participants in Occupy Wall Street.
My son was he's a staff person for SEIU 1199, and they were there in support. They were not going to get arrested, but they wanted to show the demonstrators and the occupiers that, and they've been supportive all along as one of the unions. And he was there, and I was watching carefully to make sure that he did not get hurt as well. I was very concerned. At Pine and Broadway, it was sort of a standoff. People were, there was a lot of confusion. People didn't know what was going on. There were some people that may have sat on some police cars just in comfort, but nobody was, I heard later on reports talk about objectivity of the press, you know, that they were jumping up and down and they were taunting the police. The only time I ever saw it when I first got there on Day and Broadway, they were just saying, shame on you, you know, to the police, but that was it. And down on Pine and Broadway, at least until about 4:30 in the morning, I didn't see any provocation whatsoever.
We're going to lose the satellite for Dorley Rainey in Seattle. But I wanted to ask you, Dorley, what did it feel like to be pepper sprayed in the face? This dramatic photograph of you being helped by two people right afterwards.
Well, first of all, it's very painful. And when they say there are no after effects, I still have a pain in my lungs, and my voice is kind of raspy. I don't know how long that will last. But the thing really is not about me getting pepper sprayed. It is a much bigger issue than that, and I would like everybody to keep that in mind, that while we're getting pepper sprayed, other issues are not being heard. And that's my problem. I feel issues become a major focus to the detriment of the real issues that cause this whole problem.
And I'd like to ask Chuck Wexler, this whole issue of the police chiefs trying to exchange information. Was there any involvement of the Department of Homeland Security or the federal officials in the discussions with the various police chiefs?
Not on our conference call at all. But you know, if I can just say a few things just in response to the last conversations. You know, this is really the struggle that the police have. This is why, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I think what Norm was saying about, you know, the partnerships and intermediaries and communication is so important, because, you know, this is a no-win situation for the police. They, you know, and one of the things we've learned out of the 60s and out of the, you know, Chicago Democratic Convention and all the ways and from the South and all of the ways the police have had to handle these kind of situations is, you know, a minimum amount, a use of restraint, and I think that's the real challenge here. The police don't want to be in this situation, and whatever you can do to have intermediaries like the judge, whatever, be the people that are intervening rather than the police. I think it's a no-win situation for most police departments. They have worked really hard to develop partnerships with the community policing, all of those things. And sometimes you have one officer that does something, forgive me, stupid, and it characterizes the entire police force. But I think, you know, if you look at the restraint that police use today versus what they used 10, 20, 30 years ago, it's substantially less use of force, but there's still mistakes, and there's still, officers that are going to act inappropriately.
Chuck Wexler, in New York, I mean, we saw a massive phalanx of police moving in the area where the judge was just describing. The police forced everyone out of the street onto the sidewalk and said, just get on the sidewalk. They were screaming to everyone, get on the sidewalk. As soon as people got on the sidewalk, they rushed them on the sidewalk up against the rails along the sidewalk. But I did want to ask you, how involved is FBI and Homeland Security in these discussions, Chuck Wexler?
They haven't been involved. Maybe they were involved at the local level, but nationally, at least on our conference calls, I don't think they didn't have a role.
But there were some press reports that there were Homeland Security presentations urging that these arrests be conducted late at night.
That may have been done at the city level. It wasn't on our conference calls. We had no one from Homeland Security made that kind of presentation, nor, we were just comparing notes. We were like, how are different cities trying to deal with this in the most civil way possible? What are some of the strategies? And some cities, for example, they didn't have the police directly involved. They had, the sanitation people and health and human services and folks like that on the front end. And that was interesting because at the end of the day, why are the police the ones that own this issue? I mean, because the police really don't want to be the ones dismantling these encampments. But, why is it, you should ask cities, why do we put the police in these areas? Because, at the end of the day, people feel as though you need some kind of legal authority or someone who's going to come in. But trust me, the police do not want to be put in this position, and cities really need to ask themselves, is there another way to handle this, this kind of conflict?
Karen Smith, you retired in 2010 as a Supreme Court judge, so you obviously have dealt over many years with the police department and police officials. Your sense, when we spoke a couple of days ago, and you also talked about your sense that there was a really hostile or tense situation from the very beginning with how the police were responding to the protesters. Could you talk about that?
Yes, well, I don't know if Mr. Stanford was the one who said this, but I think it was structural. You at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, people dressed in riot gear. There were trucks, remember, lined up for the sanitation to just throw people's things in, computers and everything, and now people, I'm told, that can't get the stuff. There was a them and us. Having worked with police officers for years, I agree that there are very good ones. It's not individuals. It is a system that's being set up of us and them. And the other thing that needs to be brought out, and I think it was in the court case in front of Judge Stallman, who was a colleague of mine, is how often do you get the police and the state enforcing private property rights? The contradictions are tremendous, just that. I mean, as you pointed out in your article I read, and also even David Letterman last night on this, points out, it's okay for prostitutes, drug dealers, and now we're having our Christmas fair where they're putting up tents, but that's for profit. So that's okay.
Well, explain that, because maybe people in other parts of the country don't understand.
At Christmas time in New York, and I think around the country, there are these little craft things that are set up for private businesses, and they put up tents, and they're there. You have to leave by 11. But
tents all over, for example, Union Square.
And the parks, Columbus Circle. So that's okay. But, and I don't know what evidence was presented, because I wasn't in court the other day, about the so-called sanitation violations that were the basis of the state using its authority to come in. But in the end, they were enforcing private property interests. And that's really what the message, I think, from the whole Occupy Wall Street's about.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. Hopefully, Adonis Rodriguez will also be joining us, the New York City Council member who was arrested by police on Tuesday night when they evicted the Occupy Wall Street encampment. And right now, down at Wall Street, arrests have already started. We will also get a report from there. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
When it's just like it's supposed to be, but we're not done purging the pervasive greed. Companies are kings of the century, and modern-day slavery assembles toys and factories overseas. Out of sight, out of mind, but by choosing to be blind, you're just as guilty as the next guy. Make way! Governments for the modern-day monarchy for the purposes of this game. Let's call it a corpocracy, though some fancy it a democracy. The puppet boxing ring, it sells you another useless thing. in to color up the garbage swirl, to clutter up this precious world, and hey, I'm just as guilty as the next girl. Stakes are claimed with pepper campaigns. A shell sun protrudes from the mountain range like a flag conquering land. We now colonize with our ads and our brands, and it clutters the open horizons of my youth. It looks two types of ways from 2 points of view. I'd humor you if you ask me to. Oh, let's contemplate the truth. I wanna make you remember you're alive. I wanna make you remember you're in.
Gabriel Louise, make you remember. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Ryan Devereaux is on the phone with us right now, Democracy Now! Reporter on the scene outside the New York Stock Exchange. Ryan, what's happening at this point?
I made my way around the financial district, and it looks like Occupy Wall Street protesters have blocked a number of intersections, sort of with the help of the NYPD and their barricades. Protesters have sat down in intersections, and right now I've returned to the intersection of Wall Street and Hanover, about 2 blocks or so east of the New York Stock Exchange. About 24 protesters or so had linked arms across the street, forming a line across the police blockade. They started chanting, "This is a nonviolent protest." And then the police started shoving into them from behind as hard as they could, and eventually broke through the line, knocking a number of protesters to the ground. The police then leapt onto the backs of the protesters. About 3 were arrested, and the protester line was cleared out of the streets and has now been replaced by scores of police officers in riot helmets. This is directly in front of the Deutsche Bank on Wall Street. It's going to be a while. It's going to be a while.
We're talking to Ryan Devereaux right near Wall Street. And the plans for today, Karen Smith, former New York State Supreme Court judge, you have felt that the media has mischaracterized what the plans are for the protests, the mass protests today.
Yes, particularly the statement that there were plans to take over the subways. There's never been plans to take over the subways. What the plan was for the afternoon session, I've been told, and had meetings about, so that I'm aware of it, is that they are planning to just have people give stories outside of subways, what they call soapboxes, on how the economics have affected them, and then to go into the subways and try to talk to the public on the subway trains on the way down to Foley Square later on as to how this economy has affected them personally, to broaden the struggle. And they have what they call hubs throughout the city. There is no plan to, and never has been, to take over any subway.
I wanted to bring Stephen Graham into the discussion right now. We started speaking to him yesterday. He wrote the book Cities Under Siege, The New Military Urbanism, just in from Britain in Philadelphia. Can you talk about, as we were just speaking with the former police chief, Norm Stamper of Seattle, and he oversaw the Battle of Seattle, how the police dealt with that, the militarization that we are seeing of police forces around our country?
Yes, well, it's a long-standing process that has its roots in policies against drug use. It has its roots in the development of SWAT teams, special weapons and tactics teams, and it has its use in some of the responses to the 1960s disturbances across the West as well. And really the effect of this, as we see in New York and elsewhere, is an increasing use of full-on riot squads, increasing use of non-lethal weapons, including things like acoustic systems that make it impossible for people to remain in spaces, including the pepper spray, including the tasers. And we have to remember this is a really big growth industry that military and security corporations are investing heavily in terms of new research and development.
And Stephen Graham, what's the market? You're talking about a growth industry. What are we talking about here in terms of investment of dollars because there are so many, obviously, municipalities in the United States with their own police forces?
Well, I mean, globally speaking, the so-called homeland security market is in real boom time. Excuse me. I mean, in a world where actual defense contracts are often being reduced, a lot of the big companies are moving into civilian applications, moving into these non-lethal weapons, moving into all of the technologies of crowd control and civilian disturbance control. And that has to be added to, of course, the much bigger markets that are growing in terms of broader questions of surveillance and security for buildings, for cities, for special events. As we see these systems established more and more in terms of everyday spaces and everyday bits of cities. So I haven't got figures to hand, I'm afraid, but it's multi-billion-dollar markets that are projected to grow globally at very, very high rates over the next 15 years, according to some of the recent market research reports.
Norm Stamper, if you're still on the line with us, former police chief of Seattle, does what Stephen Graham is saying ring a bell for you? Does it resonate with your experience?
Well, it certainly does. I might even add to that mix the increased privatization of the prison industry in the United States, where people are, in fact, making huge sums of money on the backs of those arrested for nonviolent drug offenses. And we're talking really in the millions in this country. So I think there's that needs to be considered as well. About the non-lethal tools at the disposal of local law enforcement, many of those were developed in the wake of a controversial shooting. We understand a cop's got a dangerous job. It's delicate. It's demanding. There are situations that call for life and death decision making, oftentimes with no real time to contemplate options and possibilities. Let's find non-lethal alternatives to that firearm. So the motive is good. The question is, to what extent are those non-lethal weapons being abused today? We have seen far too many examples of tasers, for example, used in situations where no force was necessary. It's just simply a way to get somebody to move faster or to get out of a car when they're passively resistant. So it's important, I think, to understand the complexities of everything that we're talking about. For example, there are many compassionate, decent, competent police officers who do a terrific job day in and day out. There are others who are, quote, bad apples. What both of them have in common is that they occupy, as it were, a system, a structure that itself is rotten. And I am talking about the paramilitary bureaucracy.
We're going to have to leave it there, Norm Stamper, but I thank you so much for being with us, as well as Stephen Graham and Chuck Wexler and Dorley Rainey and Karen Smith. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks.